his day job, he is also the president of the American Strategy Group, a former president of the highly regarded Claremont Institute, the author of numerous books and pamphlets and essays, including one that just appeared in Claremont's publication, The American Mind. You can find that online at americanmind.org, I believe. It has to do with Iran, Israel, and the Trump doctrine. We've asked him to address a slightly tailored version of that: Iran, the CCP, and the Trump doctrine. Mr. President, glad to have you with us. Mr. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. And this couldn't be more timely. That essay I wrote is at Frank is right, americanmind.org. And I'm trying to understand really in this essay and trying to present to the conservative world, the MAGA world, a kind of humble reprise of what we used to understand about all these things. None of this is easy. President Trump is taking his time with this. As we know, he's called for a 14-day pause. What he's really trying to do is figure out the real state of affairs here, because it's unclear what that state of affairs is. We were told Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program, hasn't had one since 2003 by Tulsi Gabbard in March in front of the Senate. And anyone looking at this, as long as you and I have, Frank, have long believed that not only do they have a nuclear weapons program, but as I'll say, may well already have a nuclear weapon. So President Trump, in taking a step back, is, I think, really following his typical commonsensical kind of approach, which is to say, what is good for the American people first and foremost? Our social compact is with one another as Americans. And so we have to figure out, is this good for us, whatever policies we pursue? I think he also thinks, like Churchill, and he has a bust of Churchill behind him quite often when he's visiting foreign leaders in the Oval Office. Churchill said in the 1950s that it's better to jaw than to war. And I was rereading recently Churchill's eulogy for Neville Chamberlain. And he and Neville Chamberlain would fight mightily in the House of Commons, but Churchill also, I think, admired very much in later years Chamberlain's clear desire for peace. And in his eulogy for Chamberlain, which happened, of course, not long into the war, he was sorry that Chamberlain hadn't succeeded in achieving peace. And so as much as President Trump will want peace here, he's also very alive to the fact that the Iranians are in alliance with the communist Chinese and that we have to do something about it. Let me make a couple quick points. One, I think we misunderstand today, much of the political world, our relations with Israel. In this essay I described, during the Cold War, it was not controversial that we were on the side of Israel during the Cold War. We admire Israel. They're an outpost of the West. They're defenders of human freedom. But also there's a lot of Americans in this country who think, rightly, that the Jews are God's chosen people. And it may be up to God to save them, but we are not indifferent to that. And we're not indifferent to the outcome of strife with Israel in the region. And as I argue in this essay, that it was the goal of U.S. strategy during the Cold War to have a nation like Israel as one of the hegemons, along with Saudi Arabia, along with Iran under the Shah of Iran, and also Turkey. And we thought even though these countries don't like one another, they could balance each other out. But what mattered was that they were pro-Western. And we were in an existential contest with the Soviet Union. Now, when fast forward to today, a lot of young folks don't think that that mattered, or they don't even know about it, I fear. And, our relations with Israel all these years has partly been about it's us versus them. us, the West, believers in human freedom, and the totalitarian world led by Russia, then the Soviet Union, and today Communist China. And Communist China and Russia see Iran as a proxy against the West. Now, why does that matter to us? Well, as we've long described, Iran has been working on nuclear weapons with the North Koreans, who work with the Russians and the Chinese. They've been working on that for 40 years. The idea over those 40 years that Iran could not have acquired a nuclear weapon seems a bit far-fetched. They have very capable scientists. They work in concert with the Russians and Chinese scientists in North Korea. The idea that they couldn't have built a nuclear weapon seems a bit absurd. One of the things I highlight in this essay is that first of all, let me just say, the Iranians act like they have a nuclear weapon. It's worth saying. They've sponsored terrorism against the United States. They took our embassy in '79. That was an act of war. 1983, they attacked the Marines using Hezbollah in Beirut, killed over 200 American servicemen, an act of terrorism, an act of war. 2000s, during our war in Iraq, they were killing Americans using Iranian operatives and Iranian munitions, all the while working on this nuclear weapons program. An interesting thing, which a lot of folks forget, is that in the early 2000s, and again, this was not controversial in defense circles, that the Iranians had tested twice in the Caspian Sea the ability to launch a ballistic missile from a ship in the Caspian Sea. So they had a ship in the Caspian Sea. They had a canister with a ballistic missile in it. They lowered it into the water and fired off the missile. They did this twice. They practiced exploding the warhead in the high atmosphere to simulate an electromagnetic pulse weapon. Now, the only country that they would need to do that to would be the United States. And remember, the United States, they have their children recite, the Iranians do, death to America and death to Israel. And whereas they couldn't build a full-scale nuclear arsenal with missiles capable of going from Iran to the United States, it is more than technically feasible for them to have built ship-launched ballistic missiles to launch off our coast to either destroy American cities or to be used as an electromagnetic pulse weapon. In the scenario that I lay out, they could also sink the ship. And when they sink the ship, we won't know quickly anyway, unless we look at the nuclear signature, we won't know quickly where that nuclear weapon came from. And so we won't know who to retaliate to or retaliate against. And so I mention all that because we're in this proxy war that we've all been talking about, where Communist China looks at Iran as one of its proxies. It supports them in their larger terrorist efforts in the Middle East, but also their support of Hamas and Hezbollah, the attack on Israel on October 7th. Iran was working in concert with those forces during all of that, as was Communist China. Communist China gets 16% today of their energy from Iran. The idea that they're not all working together here is far-fetched. I mean, a casual look at the movements of these people, you can see that they're working in concert. And for everybody in the media today who kind of dismisses all this as just, this is how the world works. Yes, this is how the world works, especially in the totalitarian world, which Iran and Communist China operate with today. We're on the verge of conflict with Communist China in Taiwan, with Taiwan or in Asia more broadly, but also challenging them around the world. If you're Communist China, would you want to launch ballistic missiles directly at the United States and, incur from the United States a retaliatory nuclear attack? No. You'd want to use one of your surrogates, like Iran, to attack the United States. Why wouldn't they? Why have the Chinese been helping the Iranians with their nuclear program? Why have the Russians been helping them with their nuclear program? It's to use them as a proxy against the United States. And so when I think of everything we're going through here with Iran, I'm mindful that yes, the Iranians could attack Israel, and Israel has to make a variety of calculations to make sure that they're secure. But we Americans also need to make calculations, because I believe today they already have nuclear weapons, that it was perfectly within their capability to do. They could have bought them, they could have otherwise got them from Pakistan. And if they do have them, who will be their target? And I would humbly suggest that their first target would not be Israel, but the United States. They know that if they attack Israel with nuclear weapons, that Israel will launch a retaliatory nuclear strike on them and obliterate Iran. Now, Iran in their death throes, it may well come to that, and that is certainly a calculation Israel has to make. But there is also this calculation that if you destroy the great Satan, the United States, Israel will be in a far worse strategic position. Taiwan will be in a far worse strategic position. The entire world, need I say, would be in a worse strategic position. So as we're going through this program here today, Frank, I hope we are mindful that this is not just about relationships in the Middle East that China has, but really that we're in World War III. That Karen Sigeman was brilliant in organizing a series of panels we did last year around the country, where we talked about all these things, including this very point that it is World War III we're in. This is not a new war. This is an old war, and President Trump wants to make sure we win it. And so I look forward to this broader conversation, but with the notion that the war's already started, and the only question now is how do we win it?
Brian, thank you. A perfect send up for our conversation. And we will be hearing from